The championship was 3 weeks away. Zara Mitchell had trained for this moment her entire life, the NCAA Indoor Championships, where she could finally showcase what she knew deep in her bones. She was among the fastest women in America. At 21 years old, competing for the University of Colorado, she had transformed from a regional prospect into a legitimate threat on the national stage. But there was a problem. Coach Raymond was angry. Not the constructive kind of angry, the kind that challenges you to be better. This was different. This was dismissive. It happened on a Tuesday morning in early February when the weight room was empty except for the track and field team. Zara approached him about her sprint mechanics, asking if they could adjust her starting blocks technique. She'd been researching optimal positioning, studying videos of Jamaican sprinter Shelly Ann Fraser-Pryce, the fastest woman on the planet. What could she learn? What small adjustments might shave milliseconds off her personal best? Coach Raymond's response was immediate and brutal. "I don't pay you to think. I pay you to run what I tell you to run." He paused, his jaw tightening. Then, "And frankly, I'm not sure you should be getting this much sprint work. You're wasting the team's resources." "What do you mean?" Zara asked, genuinely confused. "This team trains together. We don't make exceptions. And right now, I'm looking at your 200-meter times, and they're not justifying all this individual attention you keep demanding. You should be focusing on your primary event anyway, the 600-meter relay pool." The team, the individual attention. The hidden message was crystalline. You don't belong in this sprint group. Zara had fought her whole life to reach this level. Growing up in Sacramento, her parents, her mother a nurse, her father a school counselor, had always believed in her. They'd paid for private coaching, driven her to meets across California, celebrated every PR as if she'd won gold at the Olympics. But her father had warned her about this too. Excellence makes some people uncomfortable, especially when they see it in a body like yours. She was black. She was a woman. She was getting faster. In a sport where Jamaican runners had dominated the women's sprints for over a decade, the narrative was that Americans, particularly Black American women, simply couldn't keep pace. Even though Sha'Carri Richardson had already begun her ascent. Even though history was being rewritten yearly. Over the next week, Zara watched her teammates execute perfectly designed sprint workouts that she wasn't invited to join. She sat in the athlete's room, stretching and icing her legs, while Coach Raymond worked extensively with the relay pool. When she asked if she could join the speed sessions, he told her, "You'll have your opportunity when the time comes. Right now, focus on development." By the following Monday, the official notice appeared on the training schedule. Zara was reassigned to the endurance group for cross-training. Endurance. The antithesis of what a sprinter needed before the most important competition of her season. That night, Zara didn't sleep. She sat in her apartment, scrolling through videos of Fraser-Pryce's victories. The Jamaican sprinter with her quick feet, her explosive power, her absolute conviction that she belonged at the finish line. Then she watched clips of other Black women sprinters who had faced obstacles, who had trained in unconventional spaces, overcome systemic barriers, and still found ways to be magnificent. Carmelita Jeter, Allison Felix, Marion Jones, all legends who had fought against the grain. At 3:47 a.m., Zara made a decision. She would train herself. The next morning, before dawn broke, she laced her running shoes and drove to Highway 36, just outside Boulder. The early morning was cold, crisp, the world still dark except for occasional car headlights. The shoulder of the highway was relatively flat, safe enough if she stayed alert. She'd timed it. Traffic was minimal between 4:15 and 5 a.m. For 60 minutes, Zara ran intervals on that highway shoulder. 30-second accelerations, 90-second recovery jogs. The asphalt was harder on her joints than a track, but that didn't matter. Her legs burned, her lungs screamed. She pushed through every barrier her body tried to erect, and some she didn't know existed. When she finished, sweat frozen to her skin in the pre-dawn cold, She felt something she hadn't felt in days. Alive. She drove back to campus just as the sun crested the mountains, gold light flooding across the snow-covered peaks. She had 2 hours before class. She showered, changed, and attended her 8 a.m. biology lecture as if she hadn't just crushed one of the hardest workouts of her training cycle. That night, she did it again, and the night after that. Every morning at 4 a.m., Zara Mitchell, the sprinter who didn't officially belong, ran alone on a highway shoulder while a sleeping world carried on indifferently. She ran because she had to. She ran because stopping meant accepting their narrative. She ran because somewhere deep inside, beneath the doubt and the rejection and the systemic message that her body, her talent, and her ambition were somehow threats to the established order, she believed in herself. The championship was 20 days away now. She would be ready. Subscribe to our channel for more inspiring sports stories that defy the odds. Hit that notification bell so you never miss when we upload. For 3 weeks, the pre-dawn darkness was her only witness. 4 in the morning became sacred time, when her mind was sharpest, when the weight of external expectations seemed lighter, when her legs seemed to understand something her conscious mind still struggled with, that she was worthy, that her speed mattered, that her presence in this sport was legitimate. She documented her progress in a leather notebook, times, split intervals, how she felt, what she'd eaten, how much sleep she'd gotten. She was methodical about it, scientific. This wasn't recklessness or desperation. This was strategy. This was a black woman in America learning that sometimes you have to build your own lane because the ones offered to you don't lead anywhere. By the second week, she noticed changes. Her 60-meter time off the blocks had improved by 0.07 seconds, not massive, but significant. Her transition from acceleration to top-end speed felt smoother. Her body was adapting to the demands of short, explosive work in a way that the endurance training at the university never could have provided. But there was a cost. The physical toll was manageable. Zara was tough and had been conditioned her entire life to push through pain. What was harder was the solitude. Running alone on a highway at 4 in the morning while her teammates slept and trained together as a unit carried a psychological weight she hadn't anticipated. She thought about calling her parents. What would she tell them? "Hey, Mom and Dad, I'm training illegally on a highway shoulder because my coach thinks I'm not good enough." They would worry. They would fly out to Boulder and confront Raymond themselves, which would make everything infinitely worse. So she didn't call. She just ran. In the 3rd week, everything changed. Zara was coming out of her speed work, finishing a final acceleration, when a car pulled onto the highway shoulder just behind her. Her heart spiked. The Colorado Springs Police Department insignia was visible on the door as the officer rolled down the window. "What are you doing out here?" the officer asked. He was white, 50s, with the kind of expression that suggested he'd already decided whatever her answer was would be wrong. "I'm training," Zara said, trying to control her breathing, trying to make herself smaller somehow. "For track and field. I'm a college athlete." "On the highway shoulder? At 4:30 in the morning?" He stepped out of the vehicle, and Zara noticed his hand resting near his belt. ID. Her hands trembled as she retrieved her university ID from the small running pack at her waist. She thought of Bianca Williams, the British sprinter who had been stopped and searched by London police while training, profiled because of her race. She thought of how many stories she'd read like this one. How many times a black athlete's body in public space was treated as suspicious, as criminal, as out of place. "This seems unusual," the officer said, examining her ID. "College student running on a highway at 4:30 in the morning. No safety gear, no lights. You could get hit." "I know," Zara said quietly. "I try to stay visible. I wear reflective gear." She gestured to her vest. "And I'm careful about traffic." He looked at her for a long moment. Then, "I'm going to need your contact information. Your coach, the university. We get reports about suspicious activity out here, and I need to verify your story." Zara's stomach dropped. If he called Coach Raymond, everything would explode. She'd be accused of violating team protocols, training without authorization, being insubordinate. She'd be benched. Worse, she'd be labeled as the problem, the difficult athlete, the one who couldn't follow rules. But Zara didn't lie. She gave the officer her contact information, including Coach Raymond's number, knowing exactly what would happen next. As she watched the police officer drive away, she considered giving up. It would be easier. She could apologize to Coach Raymond, return to the endurance group, and maybe find her way to the next opportunity. But then she thought about every woman who had run before her, all the ones who had had obstacles placed in their way and chose to leap over them rather than go around. That evening, as predicted, Coach Raymond called her into his office. "Officer Jenkins contacted me," he said coldly. "He was checking on reports of suspicious activity. Apparently, you've been running solo workouts on Highway 36 at 4 in the morning." Zara said nothing. "This is unacceptable. This is dangerous. This violates every safety protocol we have, and you did it behind my back." Still, Zara said nothing. What was there to say? "You're on probation," he continued. "One more violation of team protocol, and you're cut from the roster. No championships, no meets, done. Do you understand?" "Yes, Coach." She walked out of his office feeling something unexpected. Relief. She had been cut, verbally demoted, threatened with erasure. And somehow, that felt more honest than the pretense of belonging had. At least now everyone knew where they stood. That night, Zara made a new decision. She'd stop running on the highway. She couldn't risk her place on the team, couldn't jeopardize her eligibility. But what she would do, what she had done, was prove that she was fast enough to compete without the official system's blessing. Every fiber of her being had been reinforced by those pre-dawn highway sessions. She was ready. What does overcoming adversity mean to you? Comment below where you're watching this from. Are you Team Highway Runner or Team Official Track? Let's hear your thoughts. The NCAA Indoor Championships arrived on a Friday evening in March in an arena in Boston that smelled like a century of accumulation. Chalk dust, sweat, liniment, and the ghost of every runner who had ever pushed their body to its absolute limit within those walls. Zara had flown in 2 days early. She needed time to acclimate, to understand the track, to mentally prepare. The 60-meter dash was her primary event now. Coach Raymond had made that official, shifting her focus away from sprints once the highway training had been discovered. It was his way of punishing her, she knew, relegating her to a less prestigious race, but she didn't care. The 60-meter was her stage now, and she was ready to burn it down. The preliminary heats were Saturday morning. The arena was maybe half full, not the roaring crowd that would show up for the finals, but there were still people, coaches, scouts, parents, rival athletes. Zara waited in the warm-up area, moving through her routine with the kind of mechanical precision she'd developed during those highway mornings. Every stretch, every dynamic drill had been rehearsed 1,000 times. In Heat 3, she ran a 7:21 in the 60-meter, a personal best, good enough to secure her spot in the finals by a significant margin. She crossed the finish line and allowed herself a small smile as she jogged out of the track, grabbed a towel, and hugged her parents, who had driven up from Sacramento to watch. "That was beautiful, baby," her mother said, tears in her eyes. "You looked so strong." The finals weren't until that evening. Zara had 8 hours to rest, eat, visualize, and manage her nervous system. She did all of it methodically. She went to the hotel room, showered, ate a protein bowl, and lay in the dark with noise-canceling headphones on, listening to a meditation podcast while her mind replayed perfect starts, perfect drives, perfect finish lines. Around 5 p.m., she turned on her phone and saw something that made her stop, a notification from a news outlet. Jamaican sprinter Shericka Jackson arrives at U.S. Indoor Championships as heavy favorite. Zara pulled up the article. Jackson, the rising star of Caribbean sprinting, had entered the 60-meter at the last minute. She had a personal best of 7.09 seconds, among the fastest in the world. She was favored to win her heat and potentially challenge for medals even against the American regulars. For a moment, Zara felt the weight of the expected narrative. Jamaica versus America. The traditional power versus the rising challenger, the established order versus the insurgent. In the women's sprints, Jamaica had been dominant for so long. Shelly-Ann Fraser-Price, Elaine Thompson-Herah, Shericka Jackson, they were the gold standard. The United States had Sha'Carri Richardson, but Richardson hadn't competed much in recent months due to injuries. And then there was Zara Mitchell, unknown, unranked, a university sprinter from Colorado who had been cut from her team's primary sprint pool. She smiled to herself. She had nothing to lose. The finals began at 8:15 p.m. The arena was now packed, maybe 3,000 people, enough noise to create real atmosphere. Zara took her place in the blocks, lane 4, just 2 lanes away from Shericka Jackson, who was in lane 6. She could see Jackson out of the corner of her eye, focused, breathing steadily, her body radiating the kind of casual confidence that comes from knowing you're among the best in the world. The announcement system crackled. First call for the women's 60-meter final. Athletes approached the blocks. Athletes to your marks. Zara settled into her starting position, her feet in the blocks, her hands just behind the line, her breathing exactly as she'd practiced. The arena seemed to hold its breath. The gun fired. Zara exploded from the blocks, 3 aggressive steps, then opening up stride length, the acceleration curve she'd perfected on Highway 36 at 4 in the morning. She felt the ground beneath her feet, felt her body moving with absolute efficiency and intent. 50 meters. The acceleration phase was behind her now. It was just raw speed. 55 meters. She could sense Jackson somewhere on her right, matching her drive. 60 meters. Zara crossed the finish line in 7.08 seconds, a time that shouldn't have been possible 3 weeks ago. She looked at the board, searching for her name, her time, her placement. First place. She had beaten Shericka Jackson by just 0.04 seconds, one of the closest races of the night. The arena erupted. As Zara jogged out of the track, her legs suddenly felt weak, not from exhaustion, but from the surreality of what had just happened. She'd won. She'd beaten Shericka Jackson, a Jamaican sprinter widely considered one of the fastest women on the planet. The crowd was still roaring. Parents were on their feet. Coaches were screaming. In that moment, something extraordinary happened. The noise shifted, changed character. She heard it first from the section near the back, where a group of younger athletes were sitting. A rhythmic chant that spread quickly across the arena. Black Lives Matter! The chant grew, spreading like wildfire through the stands. What had started as a celebration of a stunning sprint now became something larger, something more significant. It was a recognition that Zara's victory existed in a specific context, in a world where black bodies had to work twice as hard to be seen as simply good, let alone great. Where a young black woman training alone on a highway at 4 in the morning was treated as suspicious. Where an entire system seemed designed to make you feel like you didn't belong. But she belonged. Zara stood at the finish line, overwhelmed, tears streaming down her face. Security was trying to manage the crowd, but this wasn't chaos. It was joy. It was solidarity. It was a moment when sport transcended sport and became something about identity, struggle, and the refusal to be invisible. She looked up at the stands and locked eyes with her mother, who was standing, hands clasped together against her chest, tears flowing freely. Her father stood beside her, one arm around his wife's waist, his other hand raised in quiet recognition. Coach Raymond was in the coaches section, and when Zara met his gaze, he looked away. His jaw was tight. He was probably already calculating how to spin this narrative. Maybe she'd always been talented. Maybe he'd seen it all along. Maybe it was just that she'd needed to mature. Athletes, coaches, and administrators had a remarkable capacity to retroactively claim credit for success they had attempted to prevent. Zara walked through the mixed zone, the area where media conducted interviews. A reporter from a major sports network immediately pushed a microphone toward her. "Zara, that was an absolutely stunning performance tonight," the reporter said. "You just beat Shericka Jackson, one of the favorites, in what was one of the closest races we've seen here. How does that feel?" Zara took a breath. She thought about the highway. She thought about the early mornings. She thought about Coach Raymond's dismissal, the police officer's suspicion, the system that had told her in 1,000 different ways that she wasn't good enough, wasn't fast enough, wasn't supposed to be there. "It feels like vindication," she said simply. "Not against Shericka, she's incredible, but against everyone who told me I didn't belong here. I trained on my own. I believed in myself when my own program didn't. And tonight, the track confirmed what I've always known. I'm fast, I'm real. And I'm just getting started." The reporter smiled. "And you're doing this as a young black woman in a sport where representation matters. What does this moment mean to you in that context?" Zara thought of Shelly Ann Fraser-Price, of all the Caribbean sprinters who had redefined what was possible in women's running. She thought of Shaw Carey Richardson, of Marion Jones, of every black woman sprinter who had stepped onto a track and demanded to be seen. "It means everything," she said. "When people who look like you are told they can't do something and then you do it anyway, that's not just personal, that's political. That's hope for the next girl who's going to face the same doubts, the same barriers. I'm running for her. I'm running for all of us." Later that night in the hotel, Zara's phone exploded with notifications. The interview clip was already circulating on social media. The commentary sections were split, some celebrating her, others attacking her for bringing politics into sports, others questioning her victory's legitimacy. She didn't read much of it. Instead, she called her parents, ordered room service, and sat on the balcony overlooking Boston, thinking about how victory felt more complex than she'd ever imagined. The response came swiftly and predictably. By Sunday morning, the story had transformed. What had been a narrative of triumph now became something more complicated, and for Zara, more dangerous. The national sports media, which had briefly celebrated her victory, began to recalibrate. One sports columnist wrote, "While Zara Mitchell's win was impressive, her post-race comments about politics were inappropriate. Sports should remain apolitical. Athletes should focus on competing, not making statements." Another, "The chanting of Black Lives Matter during a sporting event continues the troubling trend of mixing activism and athletics. Many fans simply want to watch the race, not be subjected to political messaging." Then came the piece that cut deepest. Is Mitchell's training method, conducted without proper oversight and coaching, actually illegal? Did her methods violate NCAA regulations? We may need to investigate further. Zara's inbox flooded with hateful messages. Some were overtly racist, others were coded, questioning her character, her discipline, whether she was really a collegiate athlete or just a street runner trying to game the system. The narrative was being weaponized against her. By Monday, Coach Raymond called her into his office for the second time in 4 weeks. "You've become a distraction," he said flatly. "To yourself, to the team, to this university. That interview was inappropriate." "I answered honestly about my experience," Zara replied. "You brought politics into sport. That was your mistake. And now there are questions about your training methodology, about whether you violated NCAA regulations by training off campus without authorization." He paused. "There may be an investigation. Your eligibility could be in question." Zara felt her stomach drop. "But I was on campus. I was a registered athlete. Doesn't matter. You trained alone, without proper coaching oversight." "That's a violation. It could be grounds for sanctions, forfeiture of your times, possible disqualification from competition." She sat in silence, watching him shuffle papers with the performance of a man who had already made his decision about her long ago. She had won, and he was going to punish her for it anyway. What she didn't know yet was that her parents were already working with a civil rights attorney. What she didn't know was that the university would receive calls from national organizations asking questions about racial discrimination in their athletic program. What she didn't know was that her moment, her victory, her voice, had already resonated with thousands of young athletes who saw themselves in her story. The investigation lasted 3 weeks. In the end, the NCAA found no wrongdoing. Zara had violated no rules. She had trained as an independent athlete on public land. There was no regulation against that. But the damage to her relationship with Coach Raymond was irreversible. In June, he reassigned her to another coach, a woman named Dr. Patricia Holmes, who had a reputation for developing sprinters who had been marginalized or overlooked by other programs. Dr. Holmes was different. She listened. She asked questions. She modified Zara's technique, helped her understand that her early morning highway training had actually created some compensatory movement patterns. Together, they worked to refine those patterns, to make her already fast body even more efficient. By August, when the National Track and Field Championships began, Zara had run 7.03 seconds in the 60-meter, a time that would place her among the fastest in the world. More importantly, she was running with purpose again, not to prove she belonged. She knew she belonged. Now she was running to show the next girl who was being told she didn't belong that there was always another way. The national championships took place at the University of Texas in Austin, a sprawling athletic facility that hosted some of the fastest athletes in the world. Zara had trained specifically for this meet, and she was ready in a way that transcended preparation. She was ready spiritually, mentally, emotionally. Dr. Holmes had worked with her on visualization, on managing the pressure, on understanding that speed was partly physical but mostly psychological. "Your body knows how to run fast," Dr. Holmes had told her. "Your job is to get your mind out of the way and let it do what it's designed to do." In the preliminary heats, Zara ran 7.04 seconds, comfortably advancing. That evening, she received a text from an unknown number. "You don't represent us. Stop bringing race into everything. Just run." A fellow athlete. She deleted it. She'd learned to let the noise pass through her without taking root. The finals were scheduled for 8 p.m. on Saturday. The arena was packed, maybe 5,000 people, a genuine crowd. Zara could feel the anticipation. She was ranked 4th going into the race, which meant expectations were high, but not crushing. She went through her routine: warm-up, dynamic stretching, visualization. She sat in the preparation area and closed her eyes, seeing herself exploding from the blocks, feeling the acceleration, crossing the finish line ahead of everyone else. When she was called to the track, the crowd was loud and energized. She walked to lane 3, settled into the blocks, felt the familiar weight of the moment. "Runners, take your marks." Zara's hands went down, her body coiled and ready. Set. Complete focus now. Nothing existed except the 100 meters in front of her and the need to move through it faster than anyone else. The gun. She drove forward, her body moving with the kind of efficiency that had been earned through weeks of sacrifice. Her start was perfect. Her acceleration phase was smooth. She felt powerful, fast, alive. 30 meters in, she was clearly ahead. 40 meters, still accelerating. 50 meters, flying. 60 meters, hitting top speed, feeling her body at its absolute peak. The finish line approached, and Zara crossed it in 7:02 seconds, a new personal best, the fastest time she'd ever run. But there was confusion. The announcer wasn't immediately announcing the winner. The electronic board was showing splits and times, but not placements. Then finally, the results came through. Zara had won with a 7.02, but it was close. The second-place finisher had run 7.03. The crowd erupted again, and Zara recognized the same energy as before. The chanting started, "Black Lives Matter!" But this time, it was different. This time, Zara didn't just hear it, she understood it. The chant wasn't about her specifically anymore. It was about what she represented: possibility, defiance, the refusal to be erased. In the days following her victory, everything changed. The story that had been framed as divisive suddenly became inspirational. Media outlets began re-examining Zara's journey, the difficult coach, the exclusion, the 4 a.m. highway training. What had been criticized as inappropriate activism now became celebrated as courage. News networks ran full-length profiles. Sports journalists began calling her the athlete of the moment. But Zara remained cautious. She'd learned that narratives were fluid, that the same people who criticized you could praise you once the wind shifted. What mattered was the deeper work, continuing to get faster, continuing to inspire, continuing to exist unapologetically in a space that hadn't always wanted her. Coach Raymond eventually left the university. Officially, it was to take a position at another school, but the subtext was clear. His program had been the subject of multiple investigations into racial discrimination and inappropriate treatment of athletes of color. Dr. Patricia Holmes was promoted to head coach, and the department was officially restructured. Zara was offered a full endorsement deal by a major sportswear company. For the first time in her life, she had financial security. But more importantly, she had something that couldn't be bought. Proof. Proof that she belonged. Proof that her body, her talent, and her voice mattered. She used part of her earnings to fund a program for young black girls interested in track and field in Sacramento, her hometown. Mitchell's Milers, they called it. And every Saturday morning at 5 a.m., a group of young girls and some boys gathered at a local track and trained together, learning not just how to run fast, but how to believe in themselves in a world that would try hard to convince them otherwise. Zara was also in regular contact with Shericka Jackson, the Jamaican sprinter she'd beaten that night in Boston. Rather than rivals, they'd become allies and friends. They understood each other in a way that transcended national borders. They were both black women navigating a sport that hadn't been designed for their success, but demanded it anyway. One evening, in early fall, Zara received a handwritten letter from a 12-year-old girl in Texas who had been following her story. The letter said, "I want to run like you. I'm going to run like you. You showed me I could." Zara read it 3 times, each time feeling the weight and the responsibility and the extraordinary privilege of being seen by someone who needed to know that greatness was possible. She placed the letter on her desk where she could see it every morning. It was more valuable to her than any medal, any record, any endorsement deal. 3 years after that first victory in Boston, Zara Mitchell stood on the Olympic podium in Paris, gold medal around her neck, having just won the 60-meter at the Olympic Games. Yes, they'd finally included it as an official event. She was 24 years old, one of the fastest women in the world, and there was no question left about whether she belonged. But the podium wasn't the real victory. The real victory was Mitchell's Milers, now operating in 7 cities across the United States, reaching over 300 young girls. The real victory was the policy changes implemented at the University of Colorado in how athletes of color were treated and coached. The real victory was every young black girl who saw Zara's story and understood that the barriers she faced weren't because she wasn't fast enough. They were systemic, they could be challenged, and they could be overcome. Zara had written a book, The Highway Runner, which detailed her journey and had become required reading in sports ethics courses across the country. She'd been named NAACP Woman of the Year. She'd given speeches at universities and youth centers. She'd mentored dozens of young athletes. But she'd also kept running. That was the thing about Zara. She never became complacent, never accepted that one victory was enough. Every season, she pushed herself to new limits, to new speeds, to new expressions of what was possible. On a quiet morning in Sacramento, standing in the same park where she'd first fallen in love with running as a child, Zara sat on a bench and reflected on her journey. She thought about Coach Raymond, about the officer who'd stopped her on the highway, about all the people who'd tried to convince her she didn't belong. And she thought about the girl she'd been, the one running alone at 4 a.m. On a highway shoulder, believing so fiercely in herself that no one else's disbelief could extinguish that flame. That girl had become a woman who redefined what was possible. That girl had changed her sport, her country, and countless lives that had intersected with hers. Zara Mitchell picked up her phone and texted Dr. Patricia Holmes. "What time are we training tomorrow?" The response came immediately. 5 a.m., just like always. "You ready?" Zara smiled and texted back, "I was born ready."